Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alim al-hakim. Allahumma 'allimna ma yanfa'una wanfa'na bima tu'allimuna wa zidna min fadlika 'ilman wa ta'lima innaka ala kulli shay'in qadir. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we are here at lesson 8 of Imam Ghazali's Ayyuha al-walad, dear beloved son, or dear son, or O son. Adab, or adab, of the adab with one's spiritual guide. What is the adab that a disciple has with one's spiritual guide? This is what Imam Ghazali is going to speak about today. If you remember from last class, Imam Ghazali began by saying that there are things that every spiritual traveler needs. And he didn't list how many things there are, but he's going to mention 4. Okay? And the last one that we took up, that was basically the subject of the entire class, was the idea that a spiritual traveler, if they really want to go all the way in the spiritual path and experience everything that it has to offer and everything that those who reached Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala experienced themselves and achieved with Allah, then, as Imam Ghazali tells us and many other scholars tell us, then they need a true and nurturing spiritual guide, a murshid, a shaykh, a murshid who can show them the right way, and a murabbi who can take them gradually through stages and nurture them from a lower state of perfection to a higher and higher and higher degree and state of perfection until they take them by the hand and let them arrive at their spiritual destination. That destination being Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, and connecting with him and making one's worship and one's life and everything about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now he continues about, remember he spoke about, Imam Ghazali spoke about the qualities of a shaykh, a true spiritual guide, and said that he's like this and he's like this and he's like this, and listed so many things that and then at the end he said, and such a person is extremely hard to find. It's so rare. In fact, he compared it to Kibrit al-Ahmar, the red sulfur. Basically, like it's like an alchemy. It's a product of alchemy, and this idea of turning something that is a normal metal into gold. I mean, it's so it's like almost doesn't obtain. So he was trying to say that it's almost impossible to find, but he doesn't mean that it's not around. He just means that it's very rare. And the reason why he gave all those conditions for a spiritual guide, a true spiritual guide, is because of the amount of pretenders to that field. I mean, even up to today, in Muslim societies and wherever Muslims are, wherever this science of spirituality has taken root, there have always been people, because of how lofty the path to Allah is, and because of how subtle it is, and how one has to really, really watch over the inner self, not just the outer self. But there have always been people who try to pretend towards it. And this is not a blame on the path itself. In fact, the more people who imitate something, it tells you that there's something of value in the thing that they're imitating. And don't think that because there are quote unquote fake sheikhs around, that this somehow puts down the idea of spirituality, or somehow nullifies or invalidates it as a very valid and lofty Islamic science. In fact, if that was the case, I mean, there were people who pretended to be prophets. There were people who were liars and claimed to receive. So we wouldn't say, if somebody said, "Oh, there are a lot of people who claim to be prophets," so does that mean that there is no one true final prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? No, we would say that it's important to educate yourself and weed out who the pretenders are, and to seek the truth, right? So in the same way, now, Imam al-Ghazali is saying, so after speaking about all the qualities of a true shaykh, he says, وَمَنْ سَعَادَتْهُ السَّعَادَةِ فَوَجَدَ شَيْخًا كَمَا ذَكَرْنَا He says, and whomsoever felicity and good fate smiles upon, and he finds a shaykh, a spiritual guide, according to what we have described, on those standards. وَقَبِلَهُ الشَّيْخ, and that shaykh accepts him to be his student, to be his disciple, right? That he accepts to guide him. So, فَيَنْبَغِي أَنْ يَحْتَرِمَهُ ظَاهِرًا وَبَاطِنًا. Then it is only fitting that that disciple respects and hallows his spiritual guide outwardly and inwardly. And so right before this, he does say something. He says, you find a shaykh, and it's an aspect of good fortune, because it's so hard to find a true spiritual guide. There are many people who know fiqh, many people who know grammar and tafsir. If someone has a question about something, there are many people, for example, in most major cities, you can direct them towards an imam or a scholar. When people ask, who are the spiritual guides in the world? You start saying, they're there. But it's people have searched, sometimes people search their whole lives to find a shaykh. And it doesn't just mean any, it's the person who resonates with the disciple. Because there has to be, people come of different personalities. So different spiritual scholars, spiritual masters, they have different personalities. And they have different approaches to how they do the tarbiyah of the disciple. And they have different, so not every seeker may match with every single spiritual master, spiritual guide. Not every single spiritual master who is perfected or who has attained that human type of loftiness in themselves is necessarily fit to guide others or authorized to guide others. And also, not every spiritual traveler may be accepted by any and every genuine spiritual guide. So what this mentions, Imam Ghazali says it in only one line, but the idea of being accepted by the spiritual guide is also very important, right? It's not like a store where you walk inside the store and every customer has to be served, because of the fact that the path is a long one. It's a lifelong journey, and it takes some spiritual guides take many followers, and others are very selective. So it really depends from that perspective. And then so Imam Ghazali is saying the first thing is to find a spiritual guide, and the second thing he's saying now is the second point in our slide is, first of all, every salik needs a spiritual guide. The second thing is to respect your shaykh outwardly and inwardly. So if you find one and Allah blesses you to find a shaykh, then the first thing is to have respect for him. Hurma. Ihtiram is to treat respect. The word for respect is to actually treat something as sacrosanct and inviolable. So you always try to uphold it in the best light possible. Amma ihtiram al-zahir. And he's saying, there's two types of respect, outward and inward. He's saying, as for the outward respect, فهو ألا يجادله ولا يشتغل بالاحتجاج معه في كل مسألة وإن علم خطأه. Right? So he's saying, now, the outward respect for one's spiritual guide, he's saying, there we go. Do not argue with him. The first rule of outward respect, and this is just a kind of like a bare minimum. These are like the bare minimum outward aspects of respect. Don't argue with him. It's to when you take someone's hand, and you say that you are now my spiritual guide to Allah. It's a big commitment. To me, it's an even bigger commitment than marriage. Many people will say, many scholars will say that after the Shahada of Islam, the person who you choose to take you to Allah, because of how subtle the aspects of that guidance are and how they weigh on one's personal practice and even one's beliefs, how they formulate one. One of the most important decisions that you can make is choosing a spiritual guide if a person decides to choose one. because it's not incumbent upon them. It's only if they want to tread that path. And that person, whoever they choose, right? If you take that person's hand and say, I want you to guide me to Allah, then the whole point is that they have to they're trying to work on their nafs. Because the nafs, really, in reality, why is there a path to Allah? Why is there a distance between us and Allah? It's not because Allah is distant from us. Allah is near. He is ever near. وَإِذَا سَلَكَ عَنِّي عِبَادِي فَإِنِّي قَرِيب. And when my servants ask you about me, then indeed I am near. Allah says, فَإِنِّي قَرِيب, I am near. But it's our own egos, our nufus, our nafs, veil us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is because of our love for ourselves and our attachment to our worldly and selfish interests that we are not able to connect to Allah. And so there is a distance to go to come all the way back and realize that it was all within yourself, right? That it was just about the veil. Allah is not veiled. Allah is clear, as they say. Allah is clear. It's we and our bad qualities that are veiling us, right? And so Imam Ghazali is saying that the outward respect is that if you've taken someone as your teacher, then why are you arguing with them? Why are you squabbling with them? If you don't agree with something that they say, or you have, then go your own way. Then part ways with them, right? This is why even Musa and Khidr, Musa alayhi salam, when he was told to go to Khidr alayhi salam, to get some type of knowledge that Musa alayhi salam did not have. Allah wanted to show him that above every single person of knowledge, there's someone who's more knowledgeable by Allah's grace. And so when Musa met Khidr was saying, you do what I say, basically, and I will tell you the secrets and the reasons for the wisdoms behind whatever I do. I'll tell you afterwards, you'll know. But while I'm doing it, don't ask. Because even though sometimes an objection may be natural or normal, you need to trust the person who is taking you on a journey. In the same way that when we go on an airplane, for example, I mean, could you imagine like somebody from in the back of the plane, a passenger knocking on the door and like, can you ask the pilot why he's on this angle, why he's going at this speed, why he's doing this or that, and do you think a pilot would what would they say? Like, why are you get off the plane? Get off the plane if don't fly with me if you don't trust me to take you to your destination. And the same thing with anybody else a surgeon trying to do a surgery on you. There's trust that has to be there, right? And so, but our nature is that if we don't understand something, we like to argue and stuff like that. So it is the very first thing is to step on our nafs, because the nafs loves to argue, loves to always talk back. And it's something that we have to try to restrain ourselves with our parents, with our spouses, with our colleagues at work. It's something that I definitely can work on. And so Imam Ghazali says that's the first thing, is don't argue with him. And the second thing is don't be busy trying to prove your point for everything, even if your spiritual guide is mistaken. So the other thing of the nafs, if it's not an argument, then the nafs likes to point out when it's right. So the teacher makes a mistake, and you've got that eager beaver, putting up the hand and saying, oh, but you made a mistake here. Oh, but you mean this. And it's considered bad adab to do that with your spiritual guide. When he makes a mistake, when he forgets something, to kind of like correct him. As if we know, and the spiritual guide doesn't know. And so, maybe perhaps in the beginning as well, people, unless the spiritual guide himself is saying, oh, what was that again? Yeah, okay, because they're human beings. But the point is, don't be busy trying to prove your point, because what you're trying to do is trying to show them and impress them that you're right and that I'm intelligent. Because we think that if we look good in front of the spiritual guide, that somehow we begin to sometimes forget that it's not the spiritual guide who's the point. It's Allah. He's leading us to Allah. But our attachments to human beings, to looking up to people, to wanting to be in the presence of people who we feel are beneficial to us, sometimes we try to show our intelligence to people. and especially to our spiritual guide. And you know, a know-it-all is not a very good quality to have, being a know-it-all in a spiritual path. And even if he's mistaken sometimes, and this is another thing, it's just like it takes, one has to step on their nafs, not only with their shaykh, more so with their parents, even with one's spouse or with someone else. What I've seen is the people of spirituality that I've been blessed to see and spend time with, they don't correct people for little things. Unless it's like a contravention in the Sharia, that's a different story. That you can speak about, of course. You can speak, you know, if you have knowledge and you know how to speak about that. But, you know, somebody says that London is in America, you know, literally they would just be like, no. Like they just literally just agree. Because out of preserving that person's feelings, that I'm not trying to say you're wrong, but also just to show like you're humble, like, okay, we make mistakes. We know what you mean. So don't be busy trying to prove your point for everything, even if he is mistaken. And there's another thing interesting that our commentator says about mistakes, about your spiritual guide making mistakes. So spiritual guides are human beings. And they are a very high level of perfected human being in terms of like, they're not prophets. Prophets are sinless. And there's no one after the prophets that are sinless. There's no imam. There's no anyone else. But the awliya of Allah, the spiritual friends of Allah, whom Allah has taken close, and they've spent their lifetime working on themselves, and they're spiritual masters. They're mahfuz many times. That Allah protects them from certain sins. But it doesn't mean that a slip cannot occur or something may not occur that you may see and say, hey, wait a second. And it may occur after a long time because this person is at a very high level of spirituality. So only after spending a long time does one notice a slip, or something may happen and in their vast knowledge, they understand that this is, in the Sharia, this is fine. But as beginner students, often our view of the Sharia is like very narrow. You know, what I know and what my neighborhood mosque imam said, and everything else is out of is off. And so you may object to something, and you're objecting to something and you have no idea what you're talking about. You have no idea what you're talking about. And you may be saying, oh, this is haram, that's haram, that's haram. And then there's a whole madhab. There are madhabs that permit that, for example. So we have to be careful how we object. And even in the mistakes, it is a test of one's humility and a test of one's patience as well. Do we just jump on any chance we get to declare someone else's mistake? Are we in it to show that we are spiritually superior, and even to the point where you want to put your spiritual guide down? That's a pretty bad thing to do. Now, as one of our commentators say, by the way, this is I got my hands on this text, Ayyuha, mashallah, it's a commentary. Sayyidi Shaykh Faraz gifted this to me, alhamdulillah, very recently. And what a beneficial book, alhamdulillah. It's really enriched, alhamdulillah, how we will, inshallah, read through Ayyuha al-Walad together. And so our commentator in that book, Shaykh Abdurrahman Sabri, mentions, he says, and it is from, regarding mistakes from the Shaykh, it is from the habit of the arifin billahi ta'ala, those who know Allah experientially, who have reached Allah in that spiritual plane. It is their habit that those who have reached Allah often show a spiritual disciple some act that may seem outwardly like it is something that they would not like, or that is something to be rejected. Okay? They show that sometimes outwardly to test whether this disciple has the submission that is necessary to be a true spiritual disciple. So they do some sort of action, or make it seem like that, in order to show, okay, let's see where that disciple, where his mind is or her mind is. Let's see if they have that submission. Now, we're not talking about something that is a clear contravention of Sharia. This is also very important to understand. Everybody who gets into the spiritual path should have basic knowledge of the Sharia. Because as they say, we know the hadith of Jibreel. This is just a tangent I'm taking. The hadith of Jibreel, what was it about? It was about Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. Islam, which is the Sharia, sacred law, knowing that. iman, which is your aqidah and your beliefs, and then ihsan, which is Islamic spirituality and tazkiyah. Now, whatever you want to call it. But in order to get to that level of spirituality and work on that ihsan and tazkiyah level, it is understood that one's Islam is in a sound place, meaning one knows what they should be doing in the Sharia, basically, and that their aqidah is in a sound place. Sometimes people they go backwards, so it would be like almost like a complete beginner in a sport, learning the sport by going to the Olympics and jumping into a game in the Olympics, right? This is why often the newcomer gets wiped, gets falls flat on their face. But someone who trains and understands the basics of their field and then gets to, a level of achievement in that, and then they further their knowledge gradually, then they are prepared to play in the big leagues. And spirituality is the real is the high tradition of Islam. And so it's very important to realize that they're not talking about clear contraventions in the Sharia, but they're actions that may be interpreted as by the disciple as something that should not be done. And so it is a test, it is an examination of their submission to their spiritual guide and their willingness to follow. And it is a test to see what their adab is like, what their decorum is like. When you see someone doing something, you see your sheikh eating with their left hand or something, or drinking with their left hand, right? And the young student is gung-ho. Sheikh, you're supposed to be, drinking with your right hand. That's the one shaitan drinks. And you don't know. In Sharia, there may be any number of excuses, for why a person could not use their right hand, had to use their left hand, or whatever it is. I'm giving an example. And so this test does come at some point from many of the people who are spiritual masters, as we understand. And it is also very important for the spiritual traveler, the salik, to know that his benefit in the mistakes of his sheikh, when his sheikh makes a mistake, is more beneficial to him than when he is right from his own self. So the mistake of the spiritual guide can be more beneficial to the spiritual disciple than the spiritual disciple being right themselves. Why? Because again, we're not talking about clear contraventions of Sharia. That is something that doesn't even enter into this discussion, because this is spirituality now. It's beyond the Islam and the Iman phase, right? And if anybody sees a clear contravention of belief or Sharia, and they know that among the ulama, then they should be removing themselves from that situation, or consulting with other senior scholars to figure out what to do next. But we're talking about now that mistake it's better to be. The mistake of your spiritual guide is better because it shows humility when you can stop yourself when you think you're right and accept that someone else may be right. And if it's your spiritual guide, to give them that benefit of the doubt. It's not even about benefit of the doubt. It's the belief that this person will lead me to Allah. And so even their mistake, just like, for example, when you have a commander of an army, right? Or a government, for example, if everybody in the army on the field of battle, in the theater of war, was to say, you're making a mistake to the general, and start to contradict them, there would be no unity. There would be no way to lead, right? And this is why even a ruler needs support in whatever policies that they fairly try to enact, even if sometimes they're mistaken, because otherwise it causes anarchy and chaos, and no one gets anything done. So in the same way, it is important to remember that. So getting back to this, and then he says, Imam Ghazali says, so what else? What other aspects of outward manners are there? وَلَا يُلْقِي بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ سَجَّادَتَهُ إِلَّا وَقْتَ أَدَاءِ الصَّلَاةِ فَإِذَا فَرَغَ يَرْفَعُهَا. This is an interesting one. And don't lay out his prayer rug except at prayer time. Then lift it up at the end, then roll it up at the end. So it implies here that there is a type of khidmah, that the most important thing, one of the most important things that a spiritual disciple can do for their spiritual guide is to be in their service. And you serve them not the way that a servant serves a rich person or a king because they want to, they want to get some sort of favor. But because that person is in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and by doing service to that person, you are making shukr to Allah, honoring a servant of Allah for Allah's sake, to be able to step on one's nafs and benefit from that person. So khidmah, man lam yakhdam yandam, the one who does not do khidmah, as they say, will regret. Because khidmah is a great door of the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to serve your family, to serve your community, to serve the needy, and to serve the scholars of the ulama of Islam, and to serve those who are our spiritual masters and our spiritual guides. Khidmah is one of the greatest things that we can do. And there are people, as from what the spiritual scholars say, who reached Allah simply through sticking to serving other people. Not in doing, a million rakahs, not in outdoing everyone in dhikr or in some other, or giving more charity, but in serving other people. And subhanAllah, when you hear about some of the spiritual guides who recently within the last century have gone back to Allah, you hear how much they used to serve people. That they were the spiritual masters, and yet they would be the ones pouring the water in the gatherings. They'd be the ones pouring the tea in the gatherings, straightening shoes of the people who attend the gatherings. And yet, look at their spiritual state compared to everyone else's, and Allah knows best. So do not lay out his prayer rug except at prayer time. Why? The other thing is this, about that eagerness to do what you think should be done. This is not right. And in general, with the ulama, is that a student stops and observes, what does his shaykh want? What does the shaykh want? Is this the time for that? Rather than trying to always do what they think should be done. Unless for example, it's time for your shaykh's salat al-duha. It's time for tahajjud. And so the shaykh likes that. He's saying, don't be like a kind of a nuisance by you trying to impose on the shaykh what the shaykh should be doing. And at the end, however, then you roll up that prayer rug as an act of khidmah as well. That's an act of humility. So that's a very specific example. And the other thing, that the fourth point now is وَلَا يُكْثِرْ نَوَافِلَ الصَّلَاةِ بِحَضْرَتِهِ. Subhanallah. And he does not pray too many extra nafil prayers in his presence. That's interesting. Imam Ghazali is saying, when you're with your shaykh, your spiritual guide, you pray your fard, of course, you pray your sunnahs, but you don't start knocking out all of the extra acts of worship. And it's not just nafil prayer. What they advise is, that's the time when you're in the presence and company of your shaykh, unless your shaykh tells you to do it, or that he's okay with you doing it. Then the job of the spiritual disciple, right? Number one is to be in the service of this shaykh. And if the problem is that sometimes the disciple may think that because the spiritual guide does many acts of worship, that he will also go off and do many acts of worship, but then loses the opportunity to observe the way that the spiritual guide worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his closeness to the sunnah, his understanding of fiqh. Many times, there may be a need that your shaykh has, and because you're off and busy doing your acts of worship, you're not able to take care of that need. So someone in the position of khidmah should be attentive towards the one they are serving. Not that when it's time to get up, the spiritual guide is very elderly, needs some help, and you're off in a corner praying your prayer, and you're not able to help the one who you have undertaken to serve, for the sake of Allah. And so you don't. In fact, then our commentator in Ayyuha also says, rather he should not even do too many other acts of worship and awrad. So, for example, your shaykh is speaking, and you've got your misbah out, and and he's speaking to you, he's teaching you. I've seen this before, where a spiritual guide will say, like, there are people in the gathering, like, making dhikr, and it's just like, just hold on from the dhikr for a little bit, listen to the teaching, because you can't do too many things at once. And so don't distract from the benefit that Allah has put in front of you. Allah has shown you a human being who can take you on the path to Allah. And in fact, then our commentator says, and in fact, should not even do too many other acts of awrad, or like, dhikrs and these types of things. Rather, his act of worship at that point, and his devotional act should be one single act. What is that? And that is the most important of acts of remembrance. That is the most important of devotional acts. And that is to gather up and summon the presence of Allah in his heart while he is with his shaykh. To be thinking of Allah and to be to have your heart in a state of dhikr to Allah when one is in the presence of one's shaykh, after taking out all of the other things other than Allah. So when one is with their spiritual guide, Imam Ghazali is saying, and our commentator is saying, teaching us, that that's not the time to start thinking about debates between this group and that group and what this person said and the proofs for this and the proofs for that, or what this disciple is saying and what these people are trying to do to my shaykh. That's not the time to think about all those things. You take that out completely. When you're in the presence of someone who you believe has reached Allah and you believe that Allah loves them, that they are beloved friends of Allah, and that they are walking on the path of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that they're inheritors of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you use that moment to be attentive with Allah, the way that the spiritual guide is always attentive with Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, so that you don't miss out on any of the benefits, so that you do not miss out on any of the benefits that are coming down around that spiritual guide in their presence. And the next thing that Imam Ghazali says, the fifth of the outward adab, وَيَعْمَلْ مَا يَأْمُرُهُ الشَّيْخ مِنَ الْعَمَلِ بِقَدْرِ وُسْعِهِ وَطَاقَتِهِ. And then you do what the shaykh orders you to do to the best of your ability, right? You do it to the best of your ability. No one is saying that, first of all, and this is what, so it's very important that part of that relationship is that you do what your spiritual guide asks you to do. Why? Because in every spiritual guide has a different form of tarbiyah. In fact, it's not just in the difference between the orders of spirituality, the turuq, the Sufi tariqas, but even in the same order and path, you could have different shaykhs who have a very different temperament and a very different approach because of what they feel their students need in their time, their place, and their context, or even that individual student. And so doing what your shaykh asks you to do would be the equivalent of following a doctor's orders. The doctor tells you, if you want to get over this disease and sickness, stay away from this and do this. And if you are smart and you want to achieve what the doctor is telling you, you will follow the doctor's orders. And that will obviously, inshallah, bring about a good result. That's what's hoped from it. With a spiritual guide, even more so, because they've tried and done that themselves. And so sometimes, for example, and you see this, sometimes you have a spiritual guide and they were one way and their spiritual guide, who they took from their shaykh, was a bit different. And then their shaykh was a bit different as well. Why? Because times change. And there was a point in time, let's say for example, during the colonial period, where let's say for example, like wearing Western clothes, even wearing like Western shoes, Western socks would have been considered like you're betraying the Muslims, and so it would have been considered something else. Then later times might have changed, context might have changed, and that's a different then something else was acceptable in that time, and the spiritual training was not on that point, but it was on a different point. In our time now, for example, many of the spiritual scholars of our time are warning about using the screen, using your phone, using what you watch, what you expose yourself to, how you use the internet, how you expose your children to the internet, for example. And obviously because that's the need of our time, right? That's the need of our time. So doing what the best that you can do, not to the best of your ability. Now, again, of course, this isn't what always a person has to know the Sharia before they enter into this path. Or it is highly recommended that they learn it as they're treading this path, because a true shaykh will never ask you to do something haram. So this is something to make sure and to know. And if everyone is ever concerned about that, then one should turn to the scholars and be open and seek advice about that. And also to the best of one's ability. Imam Ghazali says something very important here. Sometimes a person is asked to do something by their teacher or their shaykh, and it's something they can't handle or they can't do. And it causes a great amount of distress on them. And they think that by not being able to do something that they've been asked to do, that they're spiritually doomed, and it creates such an anxiety in them, or a feeling of gloom, or a feeling of disappointment, and they don't understand that this is not the point. It's not the point about doing something superhuman or going beyond, pushing yourself beyond your capabilities. It's doing it to the best of your ability, right? And every spiritual guide, who is, would know what their disciples can handle, right? And then Imam Ghazali continues, وَأَمَّا احْتِرَامُ الْبَاطِنِ. And as for inward respect for one's spiritual guide, and I have to say, subhanAllah, I'm not an authority at all on how to respect one's spiritual guide. I've said this before. We're not teaching Ghazali. We are learning from Imam Ghazali. We are undertaking these things, learning about them to try to rectify ourselves. And inshallah, I ask Allah to direct that to me first. And so if questions invariably come up on these issues, then I'll probably ask them to go to the people of Adab and the people of Suluk, inshallah. But for now, we do what we've been told, and we read what Imam Ghazali is telling us. Well, as for inward respect for one's spiritual guide, فهو أن كل ما يسمع من الشيخ ويقبل منه في الظاهر لا ينكره في الباطن لا فعلا ولا قولا. And that is that the inward respect for one's spiritual, the first thing is that every single thing that he hears from one's spiritual guide, from one's mentor, from one's sheikh, he should accept it, and he accepts it from his sheikh outwardly, meaning, yes, he's nodding, he's accepting it, okay, this is what you want me to do, or this is what you say, then he should not deny it inwardly in his heart, neither by showing that he does the opposite action, or that he speaks against it when his sheikh is not there, for example. So that he is not لِأَلَّا يَتَّسِمَ بِالنِّفَاقِ, so that he does not build the characteristics or adorn himself with the characteristics of hypocrisy. So for example, sometimes, number one, so everything you hear from him, the sheikh, and accept outwardly, do not deny it inwardly. That's the summary of what we're saying. Why is that? Because sometimes you'll be taught, the sheikh will tell you something, and you'll hear it, and you'll be like, I don't agree. You'll take it, okay, thank you, sheikh, thank you. And inside you'll be like, I don't agree with that. That is not having inward respect for one's spiritual guide. If you've taken a spiritual guide, then and they're giving you spiritual advice about something, then either you say you know more than them, and then you don't need a spiritual guide if you think you're so realized and accomplished, or you don't agree with them, you think they're wrong, and therefore why would you take them as a spiritual guide if you don't feel that they're qualified? Or you are just simply following your desires and you don't want to listen to your sheikh, in which case the amount that one obeys their sheikh is usually the amount of benefit that they'll get in their spiritual path. That's what we understand, is that maybe a person may not be able to do everything that their spiritual guide tells them because of how lofty it is and because of how low one's state is, but they can aspire. And they can also make an intention that I would like to get to this, and they struggle with it. And that's why you have a spiritual guide, not to be perfect. It's to share your shortcomings so that you can work on them together. So the sheikh can tell you how to take those shortcomings out. Because what's the point of the spiritual path? To get rid of the blameworthy characteristics of the soul, to make oneself pleasing to Allah, to connect to Allah Himself. And so if you don't tell the doctor your symptom, what's wrong with you, how can the doctor give you a treatment for a cure? In the same way, so when you hear something from the sheikh, it's for your benefit, and so you don't take it but then inwardly deny it. Yes, you can say, I'm not at that level, or I'm aspiring to get there, inshallah I'll understand. However, the inward respect is to not develop a type of hypocrisy where in the face of the spiritual guide, everyone's smiling, everyone's like this, and when he turns around, you're doing the exact opposite. Now let's be honest. Okay, this happens when the spiritual guide himself becomes the goal, and you think that when he's looking at you, That's the point of it. And when he's not looking at you, isn't Allah watching you? So we have to remember that Allah is watching us at all times. And we will slip. We will do things. Things will come out of us that we wish didn't. And that we would never want anyone to know. Even our spiritual guide, we'd be ashamed if he knew those things about us. However, at the same time, we don't deny that our mentor, our spiritual guide is correct in the tarbiyah that he's giving us. We simply say, we are weak, and Ya Allah, make us the way that our Shaykh is. That's the whole point, right? That you should ask Allah, oh Allah, you want to take a spiritual guide who you want to be like. That's the whole point, because you want to get the hal of your spiritual mentor, right? If you don't want to be like your spiritual guide, then you will not benefit completely. First of all, you won't be like your spiritual guide that way, but you also won't benefit from the teachings as much. And obviously the amount of benefit depends on how much someone undertakes the program of tarbiyah. So some people, for example, they just take a spiritual guide for the barakah. They don't follow up on it or anything, and there probably is, there is good in that too. But the real thing is to respect inwardly and outwardly, according to what Imam Ghazali is saying. And then to continue, he says, وَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ. And if he is not able, if one cannot accept what their spiritual guide is telling them to do, like they reject basically something that their spiritual guide is giving them as a point of their teachings, then he says, يَتْرُكْ صُحْبَتَهُ إِلَىٰ أَنْ يُوَافِقَ بَاطِنُهُ ظَاهِرَهُ. He says, then he should leave the company of that Shaykh. This is what Imam Ghazali is saying. Until the disciple's inward state matches his outward state. So if there's something where you have a serious conflict of disagreement, where you don't accept this, don't just stay quiet about it and keep going and smile and smile and just go along with it. No, he's saying that you should not have hypocrisy in your state. If you disagree, you think something is wrong, or you reject something, then he's saying, then leave the company of that spiritual guide until you're able to work on yourself and align what you are outwardly with what you are inwardly, right? And of course, Imam Ghazali is giving advice himself as someone who's spiritually realized. But what one should do is go to their Shaykh and ask them. Speak to their Shaykh. So don't conclude, don't take this one book and then conclude that this is always how you have to be with your spiritual guide. Rather, the point is to communicate with your teacher. Communicate. And if you feel some way that something's not clicking with you or gelling, then just ask. And there should be an open enough relationship between a spiritual guide and the disciple to be able to honestly bring out what they feel and to be able to resolve those differences, or dissolve those conflicts in one's heart. And then he says, and the commentator also say, because if there isn't that harmony, that lining up of the inward and the outward, with the inward and the outward of the Shaykh, then the spiritual secrets of the path that the Shaykh has taken do not dawn upon one. So there's a type of a hirman, or a type of a barrier that occurs when one is inwardly a little off compared to the direction the Shaykh is walking, right? So just like you have two lines, if they're completely parallel, they get to the same destination. If one is off by even 1 degree, in the beginning it seems like they're pretty close. But as the distance goes further and further, just even 1 degree of distance, you find that at a long time later, there's a huge distance between the two lines. And then Imam Ghazali says, وَأَنْ يَحْتَرِزَ عَنْ مَجَالِسَةٍ. Then the third thing that the salik should focus on. Sorry, let's So we talked about the first thing that every spiritual traveler needs, a true spiritual guide. Number 2, to respect your Shaykh outwardly and inwardly. Now he says, then he says, to avoid bad company. The third thing, وَأَنْ يَحْتَرِزَ عَنْ مَجَالِسَةِ صَاحِبِ السُّوءِ. And to avoid sitting or the gatherings of a bad companion, or a person, a bad companion. لِيَقْصُرَ وِلَايَةَ شَيَاطِينِ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ مِنْ صَحْنِ قَلْبِهِ. In order to curtail or deny the devils of mankind and jinn from the courtyard of his heart. Right? فَيُصَفَّى عَنْ لَوْثِ الشَّيْطَانَ. And so he can filter out and purify his heart from the pollution of devilishness and devilish influence. So why is this like what? This is one of four things you need to know is the company you keep. Imam Ghazali is saying is everything. I mean, right up there with getting a proper spiritual guide is that if you cannot avoid bad company, and you notice in some manuscripts, it's jinn, the shaitans, the shayateen of jinn and ins, and in other manuscripts, it is the shayateen of ins and jinn, of humans, the devils among humans and jinn, which is interesting because usually you say devils are from the jinn, right? But it is completely possible that when a person, a human being, becomes so influenced by shaitan, and they become an agent of the shaitan, unwitting agent of shaitan, that they themselves are described as shaitan. Which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Falaq, in Surah Al-Nas, الَّذِي يُوَسْوِسُ فِي صُدُورِ النَّاسِ مِنَ الْجِنَّةِ وَالنَّاسِ. That those people, that those who, from jinn and mankind, who stir trouble in the hearts of people. So, and why do they mention humans and then jinn? Because human devils, as the commentators say, are worse than the jinn devils. Human shaitans, people who behave like shaitan, are worse than the jinn. Because we often think, oh, the jinn, it's like they people see it as supernatural, much more harm, and they don't realize that having bad company from people is more harmful than the devilish jinn. Why? Because the person who a devilish person, you can see them. You can't see the jinn. You can see a devilish person, and you can imitate them, and they can take you by the hand and show you things. And so their influence is so much stronger. And just think about it. People's influence over us is obviously much more, is more impactful than whispering in your mind, in your heart, in one sense, because you imitate people. And as they say, as-sahib sahib, that a friend pulls, someone who pulls, and who pulls the state of another person. So two people who sit together, they will pull each other's state into each other, depending on who has the greater influence. And this is why the Prophet said, Al-mar'u ala dini khalilihi, that a person, to the near meaning, that a person, a man or a woman, is on the religion of their close friend. So be very careful who you take as your close friend. Because it could be, and this is not just bad company, is not just people who are against spirituality or against Islam. It could even be people who are on the same spiritual path, but their character is not something that calls you towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the things that they say sow the seeds of doubt about Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or about your shaykh and about the path. Or they have some type of crookedness in how they accept the teachings, and they pass that on to other people. Many times devilish, people who have a devilish impact, they always want to spread the crookedness in their own hearts to other people. If they're off and they have this thing, they want to have other people do that as well. And this is why they say that it is said that do not keep the company, as to the near meaning, except from someone who raises your state with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the people that we should be keeping the company with, keeping company of. And then he says, the fourth thing he says is, وَعَلَى كُلِّ حَالٍ أَنْ يَخْتَارَ الْفَقْرَ عَلَى الْغِنَى. And in every situation, to choose poverty over wealthiness, or over wealth. Subhanallah. Choose poverty over wealth always. Why does he say this? He says this because Imam Ghazali is saying this. Now, not every spiritual guide, according to their style of tarbiyah, their style of teaching, will say this necessarily. But Imam Ghazali is saying something very important. And he's saying that wealth is something, and things of the world, which is what is beyond your need, it has a tendency to distract the heart. And so this is why he's saying that if the spiritual traveler could choose between having more than what they need and potentially distract themselves, or have a little bit less than what they need and feel that they need to ask Allah for something, they feel that need, or not completely satisfied, then that is better to go with the having less that does not distract one from Allah and their path, and to prefer that always. And also, as the commentator says, because, and what do they mean by poverty? They don't mean that you don't have, you live on the ground or something like that. It means to be pleased with that which Allah has allotted for you with an open heart. So whatever you have, you say Alhamdulillah, not trying to get more and more. Or it is also said that you have, that you're always feeling that you don't have everything you need, for example. And the people of experiential learning, experiential knowledge, they say it is feeling comfortable when some things are not there. So you don't have everything you want or everything you might need, but you feel more comfortable when you don't have everything, right? And when you do have something, everything you need, you feel a little alienated because you're like, oh Allah, will this change my heart in front of you? Will this distract me from you? So they want to do away with excess of dunya. And also another very important point that the commentator makes is that because poverty was the choice, the lifestyle choice of the Prophet ﷺ, and the best of creation ﷺ had a choice between being a prophet king or a servant messenger. He chose to be a servant messenger. He chose to ask Allah. He asked Allah by his choice to be full one day and to be hungry the other day. And so this is why in many of the books, in Imam Bukhari's book and many other collections of hadith, there's a chapter on the virtues of the poor and also on the lifestyle of the Prophet ﷺ that had to deal with how he chose not abject poverty such that it distracts now from one's, but not in a state of being opulent. Now, that being said, there are other spiritual paths that may not emphasize the idea of choosing poverty over wealth, because their way of approaching spirituality, and you can find out more by seeing those, exploring those orders and methods of tarbiyah, but rather they choose to express poverty as neediness to Allah, not real neediness of material needs, but whatever they have, even if they have a lot, is that they're needy to Allah always, because what they need is not something in the dunya. What they need is Allah, and so they're always faqir. This is why they call the spiritual traveler a faqir. Whether he's rich or whether he's poor, they call him the faqir because he's always needy to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether his pockets are full or empty. And in another way, his wealthiness is with the wealth of what he has with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in choosing poverty, choose always to be needy to Allah, and to always be in a state of gratitude for what Allah has given one. And so therefore, even if one has a lot of wealth, they use it for Allah's sake and they have gratitude to Allah. And so therefore, this is not the type of wealth that distracts them, right? Now that's just a different approach than what Imam Ghazali is speaking about. And then he says, Imam Ghazali says, ثم اعلم أن التصوف له خصلتان. And then know that tasawwuf has two defining characteristics. So now he's going to he uses the word tasawwuf, Sufism, right? And he's saying it has two essential or defining qualities. And before you get to that point, the commentators try to define what is tasawwuf. And there are many different definitions of it. Many different definitions. Some said it is I'll just read a few of the definitions. Some said it is trying to adopt the character traits, the noble, to imitate divine character traits, such as mercy, such as forgiveness, lofty character traits, right? Others said it is the knowledge, tasawwuf is the knowledge of spiritual states, not the knowledge of what you say, but it's what you experience. And to gain beautiful character traits that come in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. That it's not the legal realm, or it's not the realm of theology, but it's in the realm of gaining the character traits of the Prophet ﷺ. Others said it is to guard one's moments of one's life, and to never be out of sync with their Lord. Others said it is to organize their time for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there are many different aspects, but the point is that it is something that deals with the states of the heart and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our commentator actually also mentions, interestingly, he also mentions how, Bismillah. And it's a very interesting tangent, because this word has become like, at least in the 90s in the West, it almost become like a bad word. And some people don't understand it because of how it's been misrepresented in Muslim societies, the idea of Sufism or Tasawwuf. And so even our commentator, and he's saying this 300 years ago, right? He's saying that just know that the people who claim to be affiliated with Tasawwuf have branched into 12 different groups, and only one of them are true Sunni Sufis, meaning the true people of Tasawwuf on the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And he says 11 of them have gone outside of what valid spirituality is. And he actually lists the groups, and he labels them. It's not like names of orders, but people who, for example, they thought that they went astray, and in the name of spirituality, they may be doing things that have nothing to do with the not even spirituality, but the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sacred law. Such as, thinking that you can look at something that is unlawful and you can see the divine in it because of your spiritual state. Or that you think that your shaykh is above the Sharia. Those people in those groups have gone off. That is not considered Sufism or Tasawwuf. That people who believe that a wali is better than a prophet. People who believe, he's saying that just having an affiliation with a shaykh is enough, and you don't need to do anything else about that. You don't need to follow halal and haram. You don't need to do that. Or people who think that once you have love for Allah, that there's no need to follow the Sharia. You're not accountable. Other people who claim that in their dreams they do this and this, and these things that are outside of the beliefs of Ahlus Sunnah. Or people who say that they're on a spiritual path, so everything that's haram is now halal for them. Or people who say that you don't have to earn any money or eat anything, you beg others, and that you cannot earn money to support yourself. Or those, again, he keeps going, talking about 11 different groups, those who dress the part of people of spirituality, but inwardly they have nothing to do with the teachings. It just becomes an outward thing. We dress like this, we do these dance, we do this thing. Or people who do not believe. And the last one, people who do not believe in seeking knowledge, talib al-ilm. We're talking about knowledge of the Sharia, knowledge of Aqeedah, knowledge of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And people who do not believe in studying and going to attend classes of knowledge, and who say that the Quran is like a veil, and that they have their own poetry, and that poetry is more important than the Quran. So he said, why does he say this? And why am I bringing this up? Because when Imam Ghazali is speaking about people of Sufism, he's speaking about people who are actually on the path of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. No matter what anybody else claims or uses the name of, it doesn't matter. So many times in popular media, they will say, oh, this is Islamic spirituality. This is they'll use the name, and it'll be something that's completely in contravention to the Sharia. Or they'll try to make it, to posit that spirituality is somehow it's like in opposition to the Sharia, the sacred law. In reality, they are both one and the same. They are one and the same. But the people of misguidance try to make it sound like one is the outward and one is the inward, and they're two different paths. And this is not true at all. This is not true at all, as our ulama are telling us. And so he says, and so just know that that tasawwuf has two defining characteristics. Al-istiqama, number one, rectitude, right? So I'll read it first. Al-istiqama was sukun anil khalq. Rectitude, or going straight And as-sukun anil khalq. And that is that your heart is at rest. You're not disturbed by the rest of creation. You're at peace with everyone and everything. فَمِنْ اسْتِقَامَةٍ. And so whoever goes straight and has rectitude, وَأَحْسَنَ خُلُقَهُ بِالنَّاسِ, and perfects his character or beautifies his character for people, وَعَامَلَهُمْ بِالْحِلْمِ, and is easygoing, deals with them in an easygoing manner, فَهُوَ الصُّوفِي. That person is the Sufi. The person who is morally upright and perfects his character for people and is easygoing with other people. That person is the Sufi. That person is the person of spirituality. And then what is istiqama as he defines? هي أن يفدي حظ نفسه لنفسه, to sacrifice the interests of one's ego for the sake of their soul. They sacrifice their nafs for the sake of their nafs. But here the word nafs actually means two different meanings. You sacrifice your nafs, meaning you're selfish, the nafs al-ammara bis-su, the selfish soul, the selfish ego that wants to have what it desires and commands towards evil in the interest for one's ruh and their soul, their nafs. But when it is purified from those lower character traits, that's when it's called the soul. When it connects to Allah, that's when it's called the soul. So that's what istiqamah is, to sacrifice what you want. And this is what they say. I was in a gym once and it said discipline is to give up something that you want now for something that you want tomorrow, right? Because the nafs always wants to gratify itself. And if you let it loose, it'll just take every type of pleasure that it can. And so istiqamah, to go straight, to go on the sirat al-mustaqim, on the straight path, is to say to your nafs, oh nafs, you want this, but in order to save you in the hereafter, I will not give this to you, right? And the other thing is to be at peace with other people. And then he says, right, whoever shows rectitude, has good character with people and deals with them in an easy-going manner, then they are the true Sufi. They are a Sufi, right? And that's a big title. Like, it's not something that anybody should really claim for themselves. It's not a group. It's not a sect. It's actually a very lofty position and title and a state with Allah that one should not like necessarily call themselves. And then he's saying وَهُوَ, and then what is he says وَحُسْنُ الْخُلُقِ بِالنَّاسِ, and having good character with people. He says having good character with people, هُوَ أَلَّا تَحْمَلَ النَّاسَ عَلَى مُرَادِ نَفْسِكَ. It is not to burden people with what you want. بل تحمل نفسك على مرادهم ما لم يخالفوا الشرع. It is not to burden people with what you want, but good character with people is to burden yourself with what they want, what other people want, as long as it doesn't conflict with the sacred law. Because the way that we are is that we are selfish beings. We always want to take what we want from other people. We want to demand our interests. Everyone's in it for themselves, dog eat dog. But the person with good character does not burden other people with their desires. Everybody do things for me. They burden them. They take other people's desires on their backs. And they serve other people and try to fulfill their desires, as long as it does not conflict with the sacred law. And this is a very lofty standard for good character. It's not just being friendly. It's literally carrying other people's needs on your back. May Allah make us of these people. May Allah make us of those who understand. And then Imam Ghazali continues, and we'll just continue for a little bit more. And Imam Ghazali says, ثُمَّ إِنَّكَ سَأَلْتَنِي عَنِ الْعُبُودِيَّةِ. Then you have asked me about servanthood or slavehood. Because the student who wrote the letter to Imam Ghazali asked him about a number of things. So you've asked me about slavehood to Allah, servanthood. وَهِيَ ثَلَاثَةُ أَشْيَاء. And servanthood is three things. أَحَدُهَا, one of them is مُحَافَظَةُ أَمْرِ الشَّرَعِ, to safeguard the sacred law. So being a servant of Allah, a true slave of Allah, is to safeguard the sacred law. So upholding the Quran and the Sunnah and the teachings of our Imams and our ulama, this is a priority in one's servanthood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The idea that they can do a lot of dhikr and the sacred law can just, be outward is not a matter of slavehood. And the second thing, he says, وَثَانِيهَا الرضا بالقضاء والقدر وقسمة الله تعالى, and being content with fate, qada, and divine decree, qadr, and one's allotted portion from Allah. So stand up for the sacred law. Number 2, be content with whatever Allah has destined for one, with your fate, whatever Allah has decreed and whatever Allah has given you, be content. Because a servant is content with what their master gives them. وَثَالِثُهُمَا, and the third, تَرْكُ رِضَاءِ نَفْسِكَ فِي طَلَبِ رِضَاءِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى, to leave off pleasing the self. Right? The third one is to leave off pleasing the self in order to seek the pleasure of Allah Ta'ala. So in order to ask, in order to please Allah, so rather than saying, what's going to make me happy? What do I really want? Instead of asking that question, to say, what is it that Allah wants from me? Rather than say, this is going to make me really happy right now. Say, oh Allah, what will make you happy? Tell me. Show me what will make you happy in this moment. And give me the tawfiq to do it. Give me the ability to do it. And then he continues and he says, وَسَأَلْتَنِي عَنِ التَّوَكُّلِ, and you asked me, this student, about trusting in Allah. Right? So now you asked me about trust in Allah, and he's being very brief. وَهُوَ أَنْ تَسْتَحْكِمَ اعْتِقَادَكَ بِاللَّهِ تَعَالَى فِيمَا وَعَدَ, and it is that you ingrain your belief in you that of what Allah has promised you. So it is ingrained belief. Tawakkul, or trusting in Allah, is ingrained belief in what Allah has promised. Meaning Allah promised to provide for you, you really believe that He will provide for you. You're not ever scared that Allah is not going to come through for you, that He won't provide for you, that if you do good, that in the end you won't win with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That if you leave your desires, you trust Allah that you're not going to miss anything that was in the end good for you, right? And يعني أن تعتقد أن ما قدر لك, meaning tawakkul, meaning that you believe that whatever was destined for you سيصل إليك لا محالة, that it will reach you without a doubt. وإن اجتهد من في العالم على صرفه عنك, even if every single person in the world was to work hard and strive to stop you from getting that thing. So what is for you will reach you without any doubt, even if everyone in the world strives to divert it from you. Right? That's the second point that he makes in this aspect of tawakkul in the slides. And then the third thing he says, وَمَا لَكَ يُكْتَبْ لَكَ, and that which is for you, وَمَا لَكَ يُكْتَبْ لَكَ لَنْ يَصِلَ إِلَيْكَ, and that should be in this there's a mistake I think in this manuscript, and that which is not written for you will not reach you. وَإِنْ سَاعَدَكَ جَمِيعُ الْعَالَمِ, even if the world helps you, if everybody in the world helps you to try to get it, they still will not get it. You still will not be able to get it, inshallah. So what we'll do here, we still have some left in this chapter, but we're going to end now to take some questions, inshallah, and we'll finish this lesson off, inshallah, next week. Inshallah. Are there any questions so far about anything that we've talked about today? There are a lot of concepts. See, now Imam Ghazali, in the first couple of classes, he said basically the same thing, in different ways. Why knowledge has to have action, otherwise knowledge is not valid. The importance of actions. And now he's left that in one sense, focusing on states of the heart, states. This is like the Imam Ghazali in terms of his spiritual vision and outlook that he's giving us. So these are all very lofty things. Like one of these things, tawakkul, we could spend an entire lifetime, and only if Allah wants us to realize what it is that we'll realize it. Or, he's going to talk about ikhlas next week. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, forgive us for our shortcomings in not being exemplars exactly in everything that Imam Ghazali is talking about. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to be realized in what he's speaking about and to follow our spiritual masters on the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Are there any questions? Yep, Sufyan? Yeah. Yeah. Our brother has given us a good point, saying that sometimes in the long run, your spiritual teacher, who you take as your teacher, can often have more impact on you or influence in that sense than even your parents sometimes, depending on what your parents were like as well. Definitely the fact that one's teacher determines, often can teach what to believe about Allah and the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, the impact of that, the parents are said to at least minimally safeguard a person in this world, whereas the point of one's guiding scholar or sheikh is that they safeguard a person in the hereafter. So, however, that doesn't mean that you ever disobey your parents in what they legitimately deserve, or in their respect for the sake of any other scholar or teacher. This is something that we should know. And this is something that would have been understood from Imam Ghazali's time, which is that your parents, the Prophet was asked, "Who do I love the most?" He said, "Your mother, your mother, your mother. Then who? Then your father." And a man came to the Prophet saying that I've come to fight for the Deen with you, behind you, to support Islam, and I left my parents crying. And the Prophet said, "Go back and make them laugh just as you made them cry." Showing that this Deen is not about, may Allah forgive us, running roughshod over your parents' feelings and heart and trying to pursue spirituality out there while you have neglected your parents here. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us realize that and be good to our parents and make up for whatever has gone now. Is there a question from the forum, from the chat box? I'm sorry? Oh, that's okay. We can just take up the question, yeah. If it's on topic, yeah.
There's a question. What are the etiquettes of one asking a sheikh to be their sheikh?
What are the etiquettes of one who wants to ask their sheikh wants to ask a scholar if they can be their sheikh? The etiquettes of it? Again, I'm not the king of etiquettes, or many times in reality, the times that one first connects with their spiritual guide is the time that they have the least etiquette, sometimes because they're new. You're really wet behind the ears, so you don't realize how you wish you could have asked your sheikh. But I mean, being honest is one of the biggest things. Obviously, being considerate for the person that you're asking. You don't try to, impose on them or barge in on them. They're tired and you're like rushing up to them. Give people space. Try to find them at a time that is appropriate for them. With not just trying to get your own demand in. Hey, let me be my sheikh. Not like that, but asking politely if you can speak with them. Ask questions to them. The other thing is that the adab in general, get to know what your spiritual guide wants from you and what they're about and what their teachings are. So rather than, adab is not about putting your head low and going like this and kissing the hand. That's not all adab is, or like writing a flowery letter and using titles. It's about being considerate and being real, be genuine. Someone who is has rough manners but is real and genuine and honest, a spiritual guide will appreciate that much more than a person who's very refined and very flowery but hides things in their hearts or is not very open and honest with them. The Prophet ﷺ, when a desert Arab used to come, very rough manners, but the Prophet ﷺ would honor them and answer their questions and teach them deen. And there would be people who had very golden tongues coming from the hypocrites. They would talk a lot. Prophet ﷺ didn't bring those people close, even though they had nice words to say. So it's not just about bringing the best gift or kissing the hand. Or that's not the point. First, see, can you follow this sheikh's teachings? Is there harmony? So listen to their teachings. See their other disciples, their other murids. Is this how you want to be? So be serious when you approach them. That's what I'm trying to say. Be serious and have respect for what they're doing, and be ready to undertake and ask questions right from the beginning. Clarify if there are doubts. Part of the adab is let's be on the same page. Clarify all the things. Bring your situation forward. This is what I'm about. This is what I do. What do you think about this? And consult them. So rather than say, impose it on them, ask them and show that you have a desire and see what they say about that, and listen to them when they give you advice on that. So that's probably what I can advise, is to be honest and genuine and real, because you're going to be polite. It's not about how you do. It's not about the words that you say. It's about what's inside the heart. And keep asking Allah and for guidance to a shaykh, and to do it sincerely for the sake of Allah. Other question?
Someone was asking, can one have more than one shaykh?
So Imam Ghazali is implying that you find a single scholar, a single spiritual guide to guide you. Some people do take multiple sheikhs, but obviously if the point is, it's like having multiple coaches. If you have multiple coaches, one is telling you to do one exercise and the other one is telling you to do the other training exercise. One is saying, you have to have this diet, and the other one is saying you have to eat this. The other one is saying, no, don't eat this. It would obviously conflict. So yes, if the point of that is just to have like barakah, like barakah, oh, I'm connected to this person, they smile at me when I go to their majlis, I do their dhikr when I go here, I do this, then that's not really necessarily undertaking a spiritual path, which is to say, I believe in your method of tarbiyah, and I believe that you have reached Allah, and therefore I want you to take me to Allah as well, and take out these, by Allah's grace, and teach me how to take out these bad qualities from my nafs. That takes training. And usually as well, a spiritual guide will spend their time and attention on those people who are dedicated to the path that they're bringing them down. Not necessarily someone who's barakah surfing, as they call it, surfing around for barakah, which is okay, but if one doesn't have an intention to be serious about a spiritual path. But as I've heard my own sheikh say, that the more sheikhs one have, it's like a fraction. It's like if you have one sheikh, it's like 1/1, complete 100% benefit. If you have two sheikhs, it's like 1/2 benefit. You get 50%. If you have 4, 1/4. Now, there were spiritual masters in the past who went around and met many, many spiritual scholars, but it's after they tread a path with their own spiritual guide and became realized, and then their spiritual guide said, go and benefit from other spiritual masters and guides. And so every spiritual guide and order has their own system. Some say, yes, go out and benefit from others. And some will say, no, only take your shaykh. So I'm not even saying what I'm saying, what Imam Ghazali is saying may not be the only way. I don't know all of the different paths. Consult the spiritual guide that you are interested in following and ask them, can I do this in your method of tarbiyah? But from what Imam Ghazali is saying, he's saying you should find one person and stick to that. And all is best.
Someone was asking, how important is dhikr of the heart? Do we get thawab if we're not able to do it in a perfect way?
In a perfect way?
Yeah.
So dhikr is really from the heart, right? They call it dhikr, it's remembrance. And the thing that people misunderstand is that they think that dhikr is just saying something on the tongue. The tongue is what shows what's in the heart, or the point is to stimulate the tongue in such a way that it stimulates the heart. So why we say these certain things over and over, for example, the Prophet ﷺ is saying, say subhanallah 33 times, say alhamdulillah 33, is because you may not be conscious of every single one that you say, but perhaps the effect of saying it will impact the heart, because the heart is what reaches Allah, not the tongue. And so so it's important to understand that it's not just about the reward in this path. It's about connecting to Allah through what you're doing, not through looking just for the reward of that act. So yes, there is dhikr in the heart. Dhikr stems from the heart. A person just being completely silent and being with Allah, that is an act of dhikr. Right? Now, of course, to bring it out on the tongue is an act of reward, according to the sunnah. So we do that. But we have to remember where it begins. Disconnecting and being like oblivious and just saying subhanallah this many times, you will get reward for it, We hope for that from Allah. But that's not the point of what they're saying in terms of connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's doing both. On the tongue, but it starts with the heart. And whether one can do it perfectly or not, don't think that it's the whole point is not about performing it perfectly. The whole point is clearing the things that stand between you and connecting with Allah. Right? And that's what a spiritual guide, they can tell you more about that.
What is tawajjuh of a shaykh?
What it ostensibly means is the attention that the shaykh has on their disciple, and when tawajjuh means to face something. So ostensibly it means when the spiritual master has a certain attention paid to a disciple, for example, and Allah knows best. You can ask a spiritual guide more about that. Any other questions? Okay. Jazakallah khairan wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah make us realized in these things that we've said, inshallah. Forgive us for our shortcomings and for the things that we don't measure up to, and reward Imam Ghazali and the commentators of these books and those who gave us these books and those who enabled us to read these books and study these books, and who exemplify what's written in these books, and the people of the spiritual path, and all of the Muslimin, most of our beloved Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, and all of the spiritual masters and our mashayikh, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.